Welcome back to our countdown to the governor's debate. I'm Pat Harvey, along with my colleagues Tom Waite and Julie Watts. And this is our weekly discussion, of course, leading up to our CBS California governor's debate at Pomona College, Tuesday, April 28th. I will be one of the co-moderators, but we want to get into the biggest stories that are shaping the governor's race this week. And guys, I think we start with Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco, who of course is running for governor, polling at the top of the ticket, at least the first top two tiers. But the big story with him, he seized over 500,000 ballots, saying that he wanted to count them, or the sheriff's deputies to count them, from last November's Prop 50 election, trying to look for, and I guess he said, an oversampling of ballots. Now, of course, he was sued by the Attorney General Rob Bonta and other groups, I believe the UCLA Voting Rights Project. And now he has announced that he has suspended his investigation. So I guess my first question to you, Tom, is what do you think that's about?
That's a really good question, Pat. It's, I was wondering why he suspended the investigation, because it seems like it was doing what it was intended to do if he was trying to get attention from it, or if he was trying to do a count. Again, and as you pointed out, Pat, he was doing not an analysis of the ballots, but a count of the actual ballots. Received a lot of criticism, as you talked about, in part because people were saying, look, if you had concerns about these ballots and the number of ballots that had been counted, then why not let nonpartisan elections officials do this? This all started, as you kind of pointed out, Pat, with a citizens group who presented their own findings through public records requests, saying, look, there's 45,000 ballots that we can't account for. The Riverside County Registrar did a presentation at the Riverside County Board of Supervisors meeting back in February, pointed out the reasons why this group had the wrong numbers. Still, the sheriff went ahead and got a criminal warrant, which is very unusual, seized these ballots, and then the lawsuits came in, and as of this point, we don't know where the ballots are. The sheriff won't tell us, and also we spoke with the Riverside County supervisor. They also won't tell us. But the bottom line is this got a lot of attention for Bianco, and there's a lot of people out there that are suspicious of mail-in voting, and this probably for them, for his supporters, this probably boosted him. But I don't know how this will play out big picture wise, but certainly it's the biggest headline right now because we just don't have any debates right now. There haven't been any high profile appearances. Things are kind of stagnant. And
Julie, I mean, the mail-in ballots go out by May 4th. So we're only looking at 30 days from now, basically, and 60 days before the actual primary takes place. I know you've talked to a lot of people. What are your sources telling you?
I think that, Tom really hit the nail on the head. A lot of folks are sort of joking online that this is, they're crossing out the headlines and saying this is essentially just, earned media, right? Like, he doesn't have the same fundraising as some of the other candidates. And so this is a free way for him to get a lot of attention. And right now, frankly, in talking with the Republican candidates and sources around them, they don't think it is realistic that there will be a top two Republican ballot. So they are trying to sort of out-MAGA each other, right? And this is Chad Bianco's way of getting a ton of free publicity, a ton of free press, and really pandering to his base, right? Now, meanwhile, from what I'm hearing, Hilton is actually starting to rack up some pretty big donors in the tech world, in the business world, folks who were supporting Mahan and then also sort of hedging their bets and supporting Hilton. And so I think if you're Chad Bianco and you're looking at that going, okay, this guy, my primary opponent is bringing in a lot of money right now, this is a fantastic way to get press and to make sure you're speaking directly to your base.
Some people say that this was a direct or indirect invitation for President Trump to come here and campaign for Chad Bianco because this was straight out of a MAGA playbook. But then others are questioning, is that such a good thing? Would that work in his favor in California? Or would that also work in the Democrats' favor by actually maybe pushing up Chad Bianco in the race, and the Democrats have him and their candidate that will appear on the ballot in November? Of course, we don't know that yet, but these are just some scenarios that people are talking about.
Pat, I think that there is a big debate about whether or not Chad Bianco would ultimately, if he is the top Republican, help the Democrats, right? Certainly, he is going to pander to that or attract that MAGA base. And Steve Hilton has the ability to reach more moderates and people who are not necessarily MAGA. Right now, though, it does appear, at least, and this changes every week, that Hilton is polling higher. So I think you're right. I think that it does help the Democratic candidate if it ends up being a Democrat and Bianco. I think a lot of folks will say, listen, there's no way, even if Hilton is a Republican candidate, that a Republican can win in California. And I think Hilton's camp would say, listen, you only need 5 million and some change votes to win. And Trump got 6 million votes in the last election.
And not only that.
Right. And so if you can turn out that MAGA base, you might get enough votes.
And if you get enough independents.
Yeah.
Because so far, I believe they're 25%, 24% of registered voters, independents who are pretty undecided right now.
That's correct. And Pat, I think it's also a really good point that you brought up the Trump factor. And also, that kind of leads us into the Newsom factor too. Like when or will they put their thumbs on the scales? It's kind of an interesting scenario, right? Because at one point, as you and Julie both pointed out, Chad Bianco wants that MAGA vote. He wants, and there's a lot of red voters in California, obviously. He wants that vote, but it's like, how close does he want to get to the sun, right? If he does get President Trump to come here, does that help or hurt him? Arguments can be made on both sides, certainly on this. But, if you look at overall the popularity of the president, particularly right now, I would say based on polling, that would be, it might be risky. And, the same thing might be said about Newsom. He's polled well recently, but you never know. People's attitudes towards these high profile politicians change. So I do expect that Newsom will chime in. But Pat, I think you raised, and Julie too, just an interesting question about when or if President Trump would weigh in on this election. There may be talks going on behind the scenes because it would be a pretty incredible move.
Well, let's talk about Governor Newsom. He has not weighed in. Nancy Pelosi has not weighed in. Senator Alex Padilla has not weighed in. And if you follow my drift there, I'm talking about some of the three highest ranking, whether Nancy Pelosi's former speaker or not, she still carries a lot of weight. They neither have come out and supported a Democratic or endorsed a Democratic candidate yet. You could say for Governor Newsom, well, he wants to make a run for president, and if he loses, that's going to be another embarrassment for him. But Swalwell seems to be capturing the attention of the White House. For example, we know that his attorneys have put a call out or threatened Kash Patel, the FBI director, who has threatened to release investigative information about Eric Swalwell that happened over a decade ago, which Swalwell, he wasn't charged with a crime, but he had an association with a Chinese intelligence spy, and they want to use that, people say, to smear his name. Now, how do you think that's going to weigh for Eric Swalwell? That could go a good way or it can go the other way.
I think if you don't mind me jumping in here first, I think a couple of things. First of all, we are waiting for Pelosi and Newsom to make their endorsements. I would be floored if they endorsed anybody other than Swalwell. Swalwell, in our interview, actually talked about Pelosi as his mentor. And he was the only candidate who couldn't come up with one single misstep from Governor Newsom.
Well, I remember that question, Julie.
I asked in the interview, is he endorsing you? And actually just recently this week, we got an unsubstantiated tip that turned out not to be true, at least not yet, that Newsom was going to make an endorsement. And I immediately reached out and said, hey, so who do you think is going to be? It didn't happen, but I will bet dollars to donuts that when they do endorse, it will be Swalwell. I also think that President Trump has handed Swalwell a gift in Kash Patel sort of, threatening to release these records. It really just highlights that he is the man who prosecuted Trump. And I think, with the Prop 50 ballots, part of that, even with Bianco, is that was sort of California's salvo saying, hey, we may have, 60%, or you may have 6 million voters who voted for Trump, but we don't like him anymore, right? And now you have this coming in, and I think Swalwell's like, see, California voters are going to support me, and they don't like Trump. So Trump, please help me be the antagonist, help me be the anti-Trump candidate. And so, I think if anything, it's really going to help Swalwell.
Swalwell.
I think so too. I mean, just to your point, Julie, it's like it gives Swalwell this ability to say, look, I'm the guy that Trump hates, and right now that's a great villain in the Democratic Party to have, right? Like that's what Democrats want. They want to be, oh, I'm under attack by President Trump, and that they can cast themselves as that. And I think that, as you both said, this investigation or the results of the paperwork documentation from more than a decade ago, if it's viewed that Trump is forcing its release through Kash Patel to somehow discredit Swalwell, I think Swalwell uses that as a badge of honor.
I called a few churches in some of the minority voting areas in Los Angeles because I wanted to find out if there's any buzz there. I haven't heard a lot of buzz, period, about the governor's race. Most of the time over the years, candidates would come to these churches and address the congregations and, really campaign to get their votes. From what I've understood, Eric Swalwell appeared with Jasmine Crockett back in January. And the other lower tier candidates, Antonio Villaraigosa, two-time mayor of Los Angeles, he appeared, but it was for a specific event. And I think the same goes for Thurman. So to me, and just listening to what you all have said from your sources and from what I've gathered, it seems like Eric Swalwell may be the one actually to garner more votes, and possibly before our debate, and certainly by the time those ballots go out, he will do more campaigning locally and, of course, maybe have more commercials running.
I think that's a good point, Pat, because we really haven't seen a lot of campaigning in Southern California. And that's an excellent place to highlight. I mean, certainly to get into different communities, different neighborhoods, we just haven't seen them down here very much. And if they are down here, they're not telling us, which would be, pretty crazy. They want people to know that they're out here campaigning. So it would be a huge misstep to not let us know. But that's an excellent point.
There's been a couple of debates where they've been Republican-only debates, and I reached out to the candidates, and they mentioned they have been called into these sort of, there's an Orange County club here, or there's a an association there. These guys have been out there meeting and doing these forums and doing these sort of small events. So they are out there, yeah, but they're not telling the media, which I think is interesting.
Guys, I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.
This has been a wonderful discussion, and of course, I think we can go on and on and on, but we're going to cut it off here because there are a lot of things happening in our news today. So thanks again, and it was a pleasure for me to join you today on our roundtable.
Great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. And we want to give our viewers out there a reminder that the CBS California stations are hosting a debate for the top candidates running for governor. That will be April 28th at 5:30 p.m. We'll be broadcasting and streaming on CBS stations across California. We're carefully reviewing which candidates to invite based on polling and fundraising. It's a very fluid situation right now, but our goal is to have a fair and impactful discussion of the major issues facing California residents. So we don't want you to miss that. But for now, that is this week's countdown to the governor's debate. Join us next week for a new roundtable, and I'll see you on debate night.